I love that idea. This idea of assess is to sit beside. And I would like us as teachers to keep thinking about this. We want to sit beside, we want to guide. I'm going to share with you a quote, and I'm going to ask you to guess who you think said this quote. Would anyone be surprised if I told you this was written by the College Board?
Oh,
Yeah. I'll say I often share this with my pre-service teachers, and we'll do a little, what would you tweet back to this kind of activity? And I get a lot of like, hypocrite or walk the walk, do as you say, right? That kind of thing. I mean, really and truly, hopefully, this is what we want to reclaim as teachers. This is who we want to be as teachers. Are these people who are, I'm going to keep stressing this idea, we are sitting beside our students. We are helping our students understand where they are and where they can go. I have another challenge for you. Ready? I'm going to show you, these are my kids. So when I talk about teaching, I don't just talk about teaching, for the 20 plus years that I've been doing this. I now come at this from the perspective of a parent. And this is Ben and Anna. And I will say that Ben was 7 when Anna was born. And I lost any say in the name because he said, Mo, you have to name her Anna. Does anyone want to guess why?
Banana.
Oh my goodness, Steve! Good job, you. I'm going to tell you, Ben is a very different kind of thinker. He's not your typical student, ADHD off the charts. He needs to be in a classroom where it isn't all take the test, get the score, move on, right? When I talk to my kids, they know 3 words to the point where they're tired of it. I tell them what I want most for them is to be happy, smart, and kind. So what I want you to do just for a moment, and it can go beyond this, but think about what you want for your students and maybe jot down 2 or 3 things. It could be simple descriptors, happy, smart, kind, or if you want to go a little further into thinking specifically about content, maybe it's like developing independence, developing resiliency. What do you want for your students? Thank you for entering these into the chat. I'm seeing some great things: inquisitive, independent, happy, a lot of happy, a lot of fulfilled, a lot of happy, a lot of, I see fulfilled, I see respect. Respect is coming up multiple times, relatable, that really resonates right now with me, coming off of something with empathy. This is great. Thank you, thank you. Now, when we think about what we want for our students, we can often start with something simple like this, right? Some simple descriptors. Then we want to take it a little further, especially if, like me, you're at parent night and parents are asking, why are you doing these crazy things with my kids? I like being able to show, hey, might seem a little different from what they've experienced, but here's where we're going. And I love showing this. This is the most up-to-date version coming from the World Economic Forum of the skills that employers want their employees to have. So if money talks, right? Look at the words that you chose and think about the other things that may have bumped into your head when I asked that question. Will you just please hit that raise the hand icon if you have something that connects? Good. I know I saw resiliency. Good. I see a bunch of great. Okay, take your hands down because we're going to look at a different list as well. This second list we're going to look at, okay, scary things, dirty words, all of this. This actually comes out of the Common Core, but don't close your eyes or ignore it right away because I think there actually are a few good things in here. And these are the descriptors of the capacities for literate individuals. So again, think about the ideas that came to your mind, the things that you want for your students, and maybe some of these also connect. Okay, so we've got all of this in mind. We've got what we came up with, what we just saw on these lists. And now let's pull this into, what does all that have to do with assessment? Well, when we think about assessment, I really like this wheel coming out of the standards assessment and accountability. I can share this website with all of you. I'll put it into the chat at the end. But what you can see is a la backward design, right? We have where am I going, where am I now, and where to next. The only thing I really want to change up in this wheel is that it's really based on students working independently and on because it was designed for online learning. So what I did was I just played with it a tiny bit, and look at that. The student and teacher are working together to ask these questions and to come up with next steps. So we just thought about that first little bit, right? We thought about the where am I going when we thought about what we want for our students. Those are the desired results, right? Then we want to get into this idea of, where am I now and where am I going next? My daughter is, in my mind, just incredible. She 8 years old, she loves rock climbing. So obviously right now it's a little tough with the pandemic, but what you can see here is this is her climbing up. And I think that it's a great metaphor for what we're talking about when we're thinking about assessment and thinking about assessment in this broader way, right? She starts climbing this wall. She looks, first of all, before she even starts to climb, she just stands there and visualizes. She looks at where do I want to put my hands? How am I going to do this? And she does that throughout. And you can see me kind of like that teacher sitting beside. I'm there, I'm watching, I'm okay, you're doing great. You can see her getting up, you can see her getting up. She hits that bell at the top, and you know what the first thing she asks? Where are we going next? Which one am I doing next? Right? I want to approach assessment like that with students. Now, you ready for some more scary slides? Right? That was like a good, happy, yes? Okay. How many of you, just give me a wave or, right? Does this look familiar? Have you touched on Edtpa at all? No? Okay, Tara's nodding no. I'm getting, okay. So Edtpa is the portfolio that is now being required of all students in order to get certified in the state of New Jersey as teachers. Now, it is, I'm being recorded, so I'm going to be diplomatic and say, I think that some of the things it asks for are totally fine to ask for. I don't love that it creates an incredible amount of pressure and it creates an incredible financial burden on our students. It's asking for things that any good college, any good teacher prep program was already doing. That's my 2 cents on that. But the reason I show it to you is because Edtpa has 3 components. They have a planning component where a student breaks down the planning that they've been doing, shares some lesson plans, talks about the thinking behind it. An instruction component where a student videotapes themselves teaching and conferencing with students, and again, breaks down what they see in that video. And then finally has this assessment component. And what we've seen is that this assessment component where they are talking about, and I'll show you on the next slide, what am I getting from looking at this assessment? What am I taking away when I look at this writing sample from students, right? They analyze it, they talk about the feedback they will provide to students. And then the third part is they have to use their assessment to inform instruction. So they look at, what do I want, right? How is it going? Giving that feedback. And then where are we going to go next? It really follows this. It just stresses them out. So that's the part I'm not so crazy about. What I want to share with you is that over the past few years, the piece that's been really, really challenging for students with Edtpa has been this third piece. And when we asked our partner schools about this and said, like, hey, do you have any advice? The partner schools said, yeah, our teachers struggle with this too, right? So we see this. This is a place, if we layer the talk about assessment, right? This is something where we're assessing what's going on and saying, hey, this is a place where we need to grow. So I want to break this down even more and share with you some things that I think you probably all know about, and then just maybe some reminders or tips and tricks to think about when we think about assessment. So you're all here, you're all teachers or in roles in education. And I think that the know what you want piece, right? This idea of analyzing student learning based on what you want that learning to show, that comes straight out of backward design. So I hope That's pretty good. Can I get like a thumbs up? Yes, we're with you. Keep moving, right? Let's get to the good stuff. All right. Where it starts to get more tricky is now I'm looking at these results and I want to give feedback. I want to give meaningful feedback, right? So now we've got to step back and think about how are we going to do that? And I'm going to say many of us think about this, right? We think about rubrics. In my opinion, rubrics get a bad rep, right? A rubric done well, it can work, right? But I think sometimes we just fall into some lazy habits with rubrics, or we fall into really just, not using them to the optimum level. So, can't go without a little bit of laughter about all of this. Your ready-made rubrics probably not going to work for you, right? But something like Ruby Star, my students love this. I don't know if others are using this, right? Where you can co-create rubrics with your students. You can talk about, well, what are we looking for? What are those desired results? How do we want to describe what we want these to look like, right? If you want to co-create a rubric with students, Ruby Star is a great place to start because you don't have to, reinvent the wheel. You can play with some of the elements they have. And what I love about it is that you can adjust the wording to your needs. Another piece that I've been playing with a lot lately is the single point rubric, right? So with the single point rubric, you're thinking about that criteria. What do we want? And then on either side, you're talking about how it's looking, right? Let's look at any places where students are exceeding expectations and any places where students need improvement. What I like about this is that you are writing individualized responses for students. It can be quick though. That's where my first year of teaching, I had 125 students. I was 22 years old and I had 2 senior classes. So a bunch of like 18-year-olds, and then it was crazy town. And I was trying to write responses on essays, and I was writing and writing and writing. And then a coworker said, stop. You can write in the margins. And then at the end of the essay, anything you want to write has to fit on a Post-it, because you're going to lose it. You're going to burn out. No way, this isn't going to work. So kind of moving along those lines and thinking about how do we make this manageable, especially if we have over 100 students. One of the things I want to share is creating a feedback bank. When we do our report cards, often we have those selected comments, right? Now, if you're giving assignments and you know what you want and you start seeing that you're saying similar things, start a bank, right? This saves an incredible amount of time. I have an example here of, I call it that there's that plus delta. So plus here are some of the positives, and delta is the Greek symbol for change. So here are some changes that I want you to think about, right? And I can cut and paste my pluses and deltas from the bank into a response page for my students. It makes things really fast. Well, I don't want to say really fast, but it makes things a little bit faster. And it really helps me because when we think about that feedback loop, I start to see which elements am I saying a lot? Where are the strengths? What are the pluses that I'm saying a lot? Because we're at mastery there, we're good. And then where are the deltas? What are the things that I keep saying to students? You need to use more evidence. You need to make a stronger connection to theory, or to research, right? Okay, we've got to grow here. I've got to work on this because I've written this or I've copied and pasted it a lot of times. So it helps with starting to see trends. I'm going to take a step and breathe. How are we doing so far? I'm seeing some nods and some thumbs. Good. Okay. See that little formative assessment right there on the spot, right? We're doing okay. All right. The big piece, well, these are all big pieces, but a big piece that I want to bring up then is that idea of what's next, right? Often students think I passed the test. I was one of those students, totally admit You know, I would memorize, I would have that, you know, I'd pass that biology test, and then you could ask me a question that was on that test a week later and it's gone, right? So we don't want that. We want to make sure that our learning is not a straight line, but a line that loops back, right? We learned a little bit, we're going to keep moving with our learning, but we're going to tie it back. We learn a little bit more, we tie it back. I like this image because I think it gets at just that. So we want to ask, right? Where are we going to go next? What are those trends that we're seeing? What do we want to do? And how do we get there? And we also, sorry folks, but it's true, we do also want to keep in mind that there are going to be more assessments, that there are going to be more ways of measuring this, and we want to make sure our students are ready. So it doesn't have to be the enemy. It doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be the worst news ever. I'm going to share with you, a colleague and I wrote this book. It's called Achieving Next Generation Literacy. I lost the battle on this one because I wanted to call it standardized tests. Since they have to, here's how, right? And I wanted it to just be like this fun, you know, the ideas are still there. I just didn't get my title. So what we're looking at here really is this big question. How do we teach in meaningful ways that lead to success on exams and development of lifelong learners? And within this text, we have connections to different tests like the SAT, the ACT, the PARCC tests, different state tests like Texas STAR, tests across the country, discussions of differentiation, and then questions to consider. So I want to share with you something that comes straight from this book, and that kind of helps to follow this frame of what do we want to learn, how are we doing, and where do we go next? Sound good? All right, so remember these? Let's say you put this on your list of, I really want my students, when they get to the end of the year, I want them to know how to build strong content knowledge without it being, oh, miss, can you tell me blank, right? So we want to give them the skills to do that. What you're going to see is a breakdown a la backward design, right? If the desired result is strong content knowledge, what's the evidence? What's going to tell us that the student's able to do that? And then what are some instructional procedures that we can carry out to get there that really meet the needs of the students? So let me walk you through this. We're keeping that desired results, strong content knowledge. We want our students to read purposefully, listen attentively, and share through writing and speaking. Sound good? I want that. You know, those are real skills. That's not, we want our students to know which bubble to fill in. Those are identifiable skills that we can present to students and say, we're doing this because we want you to grow in these ways, right? Now, the evidence piece, that gets a little dirty, right? This comes right out of the NJSLA for grade 6, right? We know they're going to do stuff like this. So we can say, this is what kind of evidence you're going to, you know, be asked to show. So here today, you will research how zoos impact animals. You're going to read an article. You're going to read a passage. You're going to view a video. And then you're going to take all this information and answer some questions and write an essay. Okay, great. Test prep days, I don't want those. I don't want to have students sitting and doing that. So what I want to share with you is a way that I wound up doing something to prepare for something similar with my students. I had a group of students. We're getting into those instructional procedures, right? Where do we go next? I knew that the students needed to work on research, needed to learn, work on using evidence to support their claims. And so we started to talk about things that, you know, that bothered us in our school community. And we also were talking about environmentalism. So the students had actually read some passages from Silent Spring, which is a pretty for me, it's an intriguing text, but for a ninth grader, right? It's not necessarily the most intriguing text, but the takeaways were there and were really important. So we were talking about environmentalism, how far have we come? And in that conversation, we were connecting it to some of the practices at our school. And guess what? Students said, one of the things that bothers us is we have a lot of students who've opted to become vegetarians. And there aren't a lot of options within our school cafeteria for those students. So we built on that. We said, okay, let's get into some research on this. Let's look at this. Now remember, this task, watch a video, do some readings, put it all together, write an essay, right? So what did we do? We watched a video. We watched Mark Bittman. He's a writer for the New York Times. He talked about the impact that methane released from cows. You want to see ninth grade boys laugh? Talk about cow farts, right? It goes far. So he talked about the impact of raising cattle on the environment. We got involved with this group, Meatless Mondays. Many schools have this. We watched a TED Talk by Alice Cooper, who is, I always want to say Alice Cooper, it's Ann Cooper, who is a revolutionary chef who brought salad bars into schools. We did all of this research, and students then, they did not write an essay. Rather, they wrote a proposal to the superintendent, some wrote to the school principal, and some wrote to the head of food services. And they used what they had learned to say, we want better food choices in the cafeteria, right? We want some vegetarian options. We want to promote Meatless Mondays. It flew out of my hands. When I tell you, I love this quote. I think that we see this, right? Students were not just writing for me, they were writing for that authentic audience, and they cared. They wanted to use the right to, the right there. Yeah, they cared. They also learned how to write a proposal. I gave them a template and they used that. Most of those students, my students were like a pretty typical middle-class community. I don't know how many of them are necessarily going to be writing essays when they get out of high school or college, but a business proposal, probably they're going to see that. So this was really the kind of writing that I think they might encounter outside of school. They also were applying all of this to something that mattered to them, not to test prep, to something that mattered to them. I told you I can't not talk about service learning. Obviously, this is an example of service learning within the school. They were trying to improve their community. So I do love this quote that comes out of the impact that service learning can have. I always love to share with people that, yeah, it grew and grew and grew to the point where some of the students who were in the AV club actually showed a bypass, like a heart bypass surgery in the cafeteria one day. It just like got out of my hands at some point because they wanted to show the importance of healthy eating. Good. So now what about that idea of where do we go next, right? What we start to see is if this is what we want, right? We want them to read purposefully. We want them to listen attentively. We want them to share through writing and speaking, right? We saw what the test was asking for. Then we have to think about what strategies are we employing to help students get better at this, right? So I want to share a few different strategies, and I know my time is super tight. I have until, does anyone remember? Till 3? I have 10 minutes. Oh, ready? Speed course, here it comes. I'm going to share some strategies that help with developing these skills. And when you think about what you're doing in your classrooms, I think even just making a table like this can be really, really impactful. So some of the things that we stressed, or some of the things that we did, absolutely, you use annotation. So help students think about, and yes, I will share my slides. We help students think about what are some good ways to annotate, whether it be color coding, whether it be symbols for margin notes, that kind of thing. We also use double-sided notes where we were saying, oh, students aren't using evidence enough to back what they're saying. So we asked them to break down what they were reading. I think blank, and I think that because the text says. The simpler a graphic organizer, the harder the student has to work. But don't be fooled. Coming up with something simple that helps the student work is not just, it doesn't happen as a snap, right? A Foursquare Organizer, again, just another way to take notes. And we use this a lot when we watch videos, because I think often when we watch videos, students want to just fall off a little bit. And but this is kind of I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a little bit more fun, and there's a little bit more choice. Students don't necessarily have to do all 4 squares, but they need to take a few notes on a few spaces, right? Improv, this is the piece that we see with students, thinking we're developing all of these skills, and we can see so much that's going well for them in their writing, in their reading, but public speaking or just generally engaging in conversation is getting more and more difficult for students. I'm thinking about, right, just their texting, I have a 15-year-old now, I'm telling you, it can be really, really challenging. So improv is a great way to go because it takes the pressure off. It allows for students to engage in a debate that is low stakes, and then you can move from there and look at what were some of the things that worked well in this debate, and what are some things that you would like to see students improving upon. So here you have just a few different topics, and they sort of range from really, really low stakes to, I think it starts to get higher stakes when we get into music, and certainly even higher stakes, when we start talking about testing. The last thing I'll show you, and this is something I'm proud of this, and I think we need to be able to say that as teachers, when we come up with something that we're really proud of, like own that and share that. So what you see here is a debate day organizer, and this is something I'm so proud of because we often want to have debates in our classrooms, in our middle school and high school classrooms, especially, and my elementary folks, I know you may do this in different forms, but to put a whole class up and have students debate, it's just too crazy, right? And you have students who are really ready and eager, and you have those who might be more willing to be audience members, but you want to make sure they have an active role. So this is an audience member's active role. They can sit back, they can watch the debate, but as they're watching, they are taking notes on an idea that contradicts with their belief about the topic, and then ideas that they saw as connecting with what they did, because everybody prepares to debate. Even if you're not debating, everybody can do the written preparation. So they come up with points that relate to their debate preparation thinking. And you'll note that here there's a blank shared the same idea that I had regarding blank. The reason for this is many years ago, I gave a workshop and a principal shared, he was this great principal in a middle school, and he shared that he would still just like to keep his hand in the game. He would go in and he would teach about the Holocaust to 8th graders. And one of the things he would do to get started was simply to ask all of the students, who in this room can tell me the first and last name of everyone else in this room? And he said they struggled. Very often he could not get anyone who could tell the first and last name of their classmates. So this gets us into this idea of we want classroom community. That's a whole other workshop I could be giving, but we want strong classroom community. We want our students to be able to name their peers and then say, hey, this person had this idea. It relates to something I was thinking, right? And then lastly, now we can get to that evaluation point. And it doesn't necessarily mean who wins the debate. It can be a slice of that debate? Who had the best argument for a point within that debate? Make sense? Okay, great, great, great. So there are some approaches. I'm going to jump back for a second and just give a reminder of what was framing my thinking through all of this. And that was this circle, right? Thinking about, where am I going? Where am I now? And where to next? And so when we're looking at what we want for our students and we know they need support with X, we want to be ready with those strategies that we can pull up and say, hey, this is going to support you and get you ready for this. Okay, 6 whole minutes. I want to leave you with 2 more thoughts and also open this up for questions. So I recognize this was big unload. One, I always share this with my students, my pre-service teachers, as they're thinking about what they're planning for instruction in their classrooms, right? Tests don't drive instruction. Your desired results drive instruction. Those tests are just the measures of what you really want. So keep that in mind. The other, and this I'll tie back to service learning, and I will tie back to the descriptors that you listed yourselves at the start of this. This is a pretty startling and, well, it's a pretty startling statistic in my mind, right? 4 years after graduating high school, students retain 4 to 5% of the content they learned in K-12 schooling. So while I appreciate, look, I was an English teacher. I love my Shakespeare. I love, I love the text that we read, but so much more of this is about skills and dispositions. And so I challenge all of us to keep thinking about, how are we working on those skills and dispositions, whether they be skills and dispositions that we come up with on our own, whether they be those capacities for literate individuals, job skills. This is what I think is what is going to endure. So made it 5 whole minutes. I will open up to questions, and thank you just all for being part of this.